Hi, welcome back to this edition of Digital Discoveries. For the past few episodes, we've been talking about something called the SAMR model of technology integration. And these sets of lessons that we've been doing are kind of geared toward our teachers. So the SAMR model is a way of looking at how you integrate technology into the curriculum. So let's go back and review what that acronym stands for. S is for substitution. That's where you take an assignment and you merely put technology as a substitute for it. You do exactly the same thing with technology that you would be doing with a pen and paper type assignment. Augmentation is where you take that assignment and you add just a little bit to it. For instance, you might be adding a spell checker, or you might be adding a URL connector, a hyperlink to it. And so substitution and augmentation are actually at the lowest level of technology integration. So those are really just enhancing a lesson. Where technology really takes off is at the modification and the redefinition level. A lot of times what teachers will do is they'll say, well, you know what, we're doing technology in our classroom, but we really don't see a difference in our students' performance. Students are doing exactly the same before we put in technology. So what's the use of putting in technology? For most people that are doing that, they're at that substitution and augmentation level. The transformation when you use technology in the classroom happens at the modification and the redefinition era. And so that's where we really want to focus on. And so today we're focusing on the modification. Modification and redefinition are, as a teacher, that's where you want to get going for integrating technology into your classroom. So let's look at what modification is all about. Modification, when you're modifying a lesson with technology, the technology redesigns the task significantly. And so I'm going to look at a whole bunch of examples here of where technology will redesign the task. It's not quite, but it's almost where the students would not be able to do the assignment without the technology. In substitution and augmentation, the students pretty much could do the assignment without technology. When you get into modification and redefinition, what we're looking at there is that they can't do the assignment without technology and integrating technology into that lesson. So let's look at a typical book report. This is a book report for a book called Days with Frog and Toad. And so this is kind of a typical thing where a student reads a book and then the teacher has a student answer a few prompts about the book. And that's kind of a typical quick way of doing a book report. So you can see here that they put in the title, they put in the author, they answer a few prompts about it: who, what, when, where, what's the book about, what happened in the book. That's very, very typical, and it's very fast to grade. So how would you take this type of lesson, a book report, and modify it, move it up to modification? Well, let's look. Here's a really good example of taking a book report and moving it up to that modification level. This is a book report done almost exactly the same way, but instead of doing it as they're just filling in the blanks, what the students did was they created a comic out of that. And so their comic became a book report. Now notice here that the students probably could have done the comic without technology. They probably would have done it could have done it without technology, but the technology made it much more easier. They modified that assignment so that the comic, making that comic strip or that little graphic novel, made it much more easier. The technology made it much more easy for the students to do, and probably much more memorable. If you look back at this type of assignment and you say, which one would a student remember most? Would they remember that assignment, or would they remember that assignment? That's something that I think is a very important concept that teachers need to ask. It's one thing to think about stuff like what's easier to grade, but it's something completely different to start thinking about what things will the students remember most. And in my experience, I have never ever heard a student say, I wish we had less technology. I wish we did less technology. So when we're looking at things like, this is a really good one. This is a comic that the students did using digital photography. Then they went in and created a little strip called "The Beautiful and the Stinky," and so that was a pretty cool little book report. But they used Lego characters, and so they actually created their book report using Lego characters, and then they did exactly the same thing. So think about this again. What's more memorable to the student? What's going to stick in their mind? What's sticky to those students? Here's another way. We all know that in high school we've done things like make a report on the glass menagerie. Here's the glass menagerie, exactly the same. It's a report, but it's done as a mind map using a program like Inspiration or some other mind mapping software. And you can see by looking at this that the student talks about the themes, the characters, the plot, the settings, everything that you would normally put into a book report, but they put it into this type of setting. So all that information that the teacher's looking for in a book report still shows up. So you're not really changing the outcome of the assignment. What we're changing is how the product is different. The product using technology is modified. So the technology has significantly changed the outcome for this particular assignment, which would have been a book report on the glass menagerie. Here's one about a character analysis of the characters in Macbeth. And actually, it's a character analysis just of the character Macbeth. And this is a typical high school literature, English literature type of assignment. Tell me about Macbeth. Think about it from your own perspective as a teacher. What would you remember most? What would be more sticky in your mind? Doing something like this, a mind map that has pictures, that has graphics, that has links to it, or you're writing it on a piece of paper. So those are some of the things to keep in mind when we're talking about technology integration. And actually, to tell you the truth, doing something like this does not take any more time than the typical assignment. And that's always been a concern of our teachers, is that, well, these are nice, and Tim, you tell me all these cool things that we can do with technology, but I don't have time to do it. But if you look at it from the perspective of, we're going to do the character analysis, but we're going to do it as a mind map instead of we're doing it as a written assignment, you still spend the same amount of time on it. The students spend the same amount of time. Here's one for science. A mind map where students are explaining Newton's 3 laws of motion. Now, think about this. If you were a student in class and your teacher had just finished a whole section on Newton's 3 laws of motion, and you went back and your assignment was to explain those 3 laws of motion, which would be more memorable to you? Which one could you share? Which one could you put up on the internet? Which one could you even probably collaboratively work with other students on? This type of assignment. It's the exact same outcome. The teacher's getting the same type of information, but it's presented in a completely different way. The technology has completely modified the outcome. PowerPoint presentations, another example of something where the technology is changing the way that the information's presented. Here's a timeline of the women's suffrage movement. The reason why I'm showing you these, I'm not trying to stick completely on programs like Inspiration, but what I'm trying to show you is that technology, the same type of technology, can be used over a wide variety of courses. You could do it in science, you can do it in literature, you can do it in social studies and history. You're not just stuck with one type of class using a specific type of technology. Technology can be used across the curriculum, and it should be used across the curriculum. That's modification. Modification is taking your assignment and modifying it somehow so that it's no longer just substituting or augmenting. You're no longer just enhancing the assignment. You're actually starting to change the assignment. And this is where we want our students to be. This is where we want our lessons to be, up here in this modification area. Real quick, here's some examples of some things that you can modify in an assignment: adding video, audio, digital pictures, using mind maps, making a digital comic, using a digital timeline creator. They're all online. Modification requires a substantial change in the format of the product when technology is included. So when you're adding video, that's really hard to do in a book report unless you're using some technology. Substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition. That's the SAMR model. That's modification. We'll see you next time on Digital Discoveries.